So, hello.
Hello.
Um, so I would like you to introduce yourself to the camera, like um, your role, your name, and what you do at the uni, and how long you've been at the uni.
Okay, no problem. My name is Will Lamb, um, and my role here is I'm a lecturer in Scottish ethnology, and I teach mainly courses in Gaelic linguistics and also in Gaelic folklore. So I teach things like Scottish Gaelic song, Scottish Gaelic traditional narrative, and also different aspects of linguistics like dialectology. So I really focus on Gaelic
Yeah.
things. How long have I been here? Well, I've been here now in this role. I think this is my 7th year. So I came in
Wow.
2010, but I was a master's student and then a PhD student here, and I came to Edinburgh in 1996. I'm originally from the United States. I lived in the Hebrides for 10 years, so I've got kind of a connection to a Gaelic speaking area. But yeah, I'll be speaking. I suppose if you're asking me questions about Scottish culture, etc., I should say that I've lived practically half my life here, but I'm not originally Scottish. So it'll be my own perspective, I suppose.
So, I mean, you just mentioned where you're from originally. So you're from the United States originally, then.
Yes.
Also, how long have you? So, why did you decide to move to Edinburgh?
I came here for a postgrad degree.
Okay.
So I did that in '96.
What did you study?
I was studying Celtic studies then.
Okay.
And then so specialising in Gaelic linguistics, and then I did a PhD here in Gaelic linguistics.
Oh,
About halfway through that, I married a woman from North Uist, which is one of the Hebridean islands, and
Yeah.
we moved there in 2000. So I stayed there for 10 years. I worked as a lecturer for Lewis Castle College in Benbecula, and I was there teaching Gaelic music and language. So that's kind of the potted history.
Yeah.
And then in 2010, I came back here and got a job as a lecturer.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
So, for our brief, we essentially are researching, Scottish identity and culture.
Okay.
And I would like to ask you, do you consider yourself to be Scottish or British?
Well, I would consider myself to be neither, I suppose, because
Oh, okay.
I'm from the United States originally. I mean, I suppose when you've lived in a place for almost half your life, then invariably, if you're well integrated into the community, then you might start to feel more part of that community than where you're from. And in that, I suppose I'd have to admit to feeling a bit hybrid.
Yeah.
When I go back to the States, people say to me, "You don't sound American. I would have guessed that you're from somewhere else." Here, sometimes people say they don't think I sound American. And then other times people immediately detect that I'm American. So, I mean, that's forming my impression of my identity based upon what other people think.
Yeah.
Myself, I suppose I've been here long enough that I wouldn't come out and say to a Scottish person that I'm Scottish, and I never would do that. But I feel more comfortable in Scotland than I would in the United States. I feel like it's a bigger part of my identity and a sense of morality as well than what my impression of the United States is these days. So if that means that I feel a little bit more Scottish than American, then so be it. I don't know.
Yeah. So, well, you can say that leads me on to the next question. So, why do you think other people identify themselves as being Scottish instead of British, like other Scottish people?
I think it's a really complicated question, and I expect that you would get a lot of different answers if you were to go around Edinburgh, say, and ask people, do they feel like, people who are from Scotland, do they feel like they're Scottish or do they feel like they're British? you would get a variety of answers.
Yeah.
And some, identity is such a complicated thing, and it's also tied up, of course, with language. So if you were speaking to a Gaelic speaker, for example, in the Outer Hebrides, and you say, do you feel Scottish or do you feel British? They might say, I feel neither. I feel like a Gael. I feel like somebody who speaks Gaelic, which is maybe a different thing. I think people are. My impression over the time that I've been here is that people are more likely to identify as Scottish than they used to. But I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, fine. So, what does being Scottish mean to you?
Mean to me?
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, on a personal level.
On a personal level. So if I were to identify the elements that in my identity that I feel are kind of Scottish elements, so there are two ways of looking at this. Okay, so you can look at things like identity in a relative way, comparing them against other people, or you can look at them in kind of a looking from the core of whatever that is. So kind of comparisons, just trying to typify the group that you're in. Compared to other cultures, I think in Scotland, people tend to be more left-wing. I think there's more of a concentration on universal attitudes, and I think that there's a long history of that, going back to the Scottish Enlightenment, for example, and possibly before. I think that social policies tend to be they tend to rely on a big government approach rather than delegating to kind of local communities or reducing kind of government support for things. So I mean, there's more, taxes go, I think, proportionally more in this country to things like social housing, to social policies, to education, to reforming drug abuse, etc. These kinds of things. So there's a concentration on kind of reforming the state, I suppose, which is bigger than, if you look at what's going on in the United States right now with this whole idea. Like Sean Spicer sitting up with the two documents and the health policies, saying, Obamacare, this is big government and this is what we've done, like these 10 pages. Yeah. Who knows what font size they used for the two documents? It's ridiculous, But on the other hand, that just shows you kind of the mentality behind it. I think in Scotland there's less of a concentration on individuality in terms of kind of, morality. I think that people look after one another more, and that gravitates with my own attitudes. So those are things that put it this way, if I were Scottish, those are the things that would make me feel proud to say that I'm Scottish. The other thing about Scotland is that it's quite a diverse country for such a small country. So you've only got 5 million people, but you've got people who speak a number of different languages. You've got English speakers from England, of course. You've got a massive, migrant population here, people who've moved from elsewhere. It always has been that way. You've got Gaelic speakers, you've got folk that speak Doric and other forms of Scots too. You've got folk that live in Shetland and Orkney that trace their lineage back to Scandinavians. So I think it's a very diverse country for being a very small country. So it's not a homogenous country. It's also a very urban country. And it has been like that for a long, long time. So, it's kind of left-wing social values. It's a very urban country with a massive rural area, but not a massive rural population. It's got a very interesting history. You've got culture. You've got, diverse cultures living here. So these are the kind of things I think of when I think of Scotland.
Oh, that's great. So, language is often linked with culture of a certain place. And like from the research that I found, is that as well as English, Gaelic and Scots are languages native to Scotland, but has much lower numbers of speaking. Mm-hmm. So why do you think the numbers of Gaelic speakers are declining?
Why are they declining? That's a complicated question. Okay, well, this all began really about 1050,
Yeah.
something like that. So you're talking about
Quite
1,000
old
years.
then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of the decline. But the apex, if you like, of Gaelic kind of speech was around the 11th century.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with economics, and even today it has to do with economics. Changes follow money and commerce. Back in that time, I think it was David the First or whatever, put up the first kind of planned towns, planned
Yeah.
cities of the time. These are places that attracted folk from the south, from mainland Europe, and English became a more prominent language on the back of that, really, as a kind of lingua franca in a way. They weren't in Gaelic-speaking areas, so that had a lot to do with it. When the power structure shifted south as well, down towards Edinburgh, then obviously that was more divided from Gaelic-speaking areas. So
Yeah.
I mean there's a long history here. Back in 1500, half the country still spoke Gaelic. The population was smaller, but it was still 50% Gaelic speaking. The 19th century, it was about 20% Gaelic speaking. Today it's 1%. So there's been a kind of a constant decline. Today the reasons for it have to do with, of course, economics, but I think a lot of it has to do with media and the notion of what's going to help you in your day-to-day existence. So kids, when they view TV, obviously most of it, or YouTube or whatever, most of it's English. And I mean, this is it's a global issue with minority languages. It's very difficult for them to compete with advances in technology that are bound to other languages and media. All the glitz and the glamour is associated with English. So of course, kids growing up today will feel very confused about. So I think people before that did think that Scotland really wasn't a very nice place, and subsequent to that, I think people do think that Scotland is an amazing country increasingly, and we've got Nicola Sturgeon, who is a wonderful leader, and I think she's a good human being. I think people are proud of her, regardless of if you agree with her politics or not. I think that she comes across as someone who values other people. So I think that's something, again, that Scotland is proud of. Yeah, there you go.
So picking up on the Prime Minister and the referendum, so despite Scottish people not identifying themselves as British, why do you think the independence referendum vote was to stay part of the UK?
I think that people are afraid of change.
Yeah.
I also think that the Central Belt, the most populated part of Scotland, has a lot of folk that aren't from Scotland. A lot of them are from England, and understandably they want to be connected to a bigger country.
Yeah.
And Brexit wasn't kind of on the map at that point, and I think Brexit has changed things. So then people were thinking that Scotland was still going to be connected to Europe. So there was maybe a lot of folk just felt anxious about the change. I mean, in the media, there's a big concentration, and I mean Alex Salmond was guilty of this, of course. Big concentration on oil and what oil could do for Scotland, how it get lifted out of any kind of economic mess that might occur subsequent to the independence referendum being positive. But then people discovered actually oil wasn't going to help that much. So there are a lot of questions that were kind of unanswered about that. But remember, the vote was still pretty close.
Oh yeah, the oil was.
Yeah. And again, younger folk voted significantly for independence. So we'll see with this next vote what happens.
Okay.
If it happens.
So, being Scottish, why would you say that Scottish people would like to stay in Scotland?
Versus moving out.
Yeah.
Well, you've got two great cities in Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Yeah.
Both booming. You've got great universities in Scotland. It's, I mean, proportionally a very well educated country. There's a good technological sector. The industrial sector, of course, isn't what it used to be. But I think, between tourism, the academic sector, IT, you've got a pretty strong basis in Scotland. You don't need to leave Scotland to for anything. I think for any industry you could stay in Scotland. I think people like to be connected to communities. I think that certainly the people that live in the Highlands and in the islands, that's very important to them. I mean, obviously I can't speak for everybody in Scotland, but as a country, it's a small country, but it punches above its weight. It's reported in the news. I mean, the New York Times takes an interest in what happens in Scotland. You've got great culture and a lot of sports in Scotland. I think that it provides everything that you would want from kind of existence. I don't think there would be a need necessarily to leave. Then again, I mean, the truth is Scotland has always exported more people than it's taken in.
Yeah.
So that's just like Ireland. So a lot of people have left Scotland, but there are a lot of things here obviously that would keep you in the country. Yeah.
So, final question.
Okay.
Why do you think Scotland want themselves to be independent?
The people who want independence.
Yeah. Why do they think? Why would it benefit them, or why would they want it to have independence?
Again, I mean, I'm going to miss a lot of arguments here because it's just my own perspective,
Yeah.
But the arguments that come to mind are, first of all, Scotland was an independent country.
Yeah.
For most of its history, if you like, as a country, it was independent. It was, arguably constantly fighting against England economics.
Yeah.
So there's always been a drive for it to govern itself. You've got so that's the history. I think part of it is pride to be, the architect of its own destiny. Scotland's a left-wing country, predominantly, and we are living in a very right-wing, larger country. The UK has grown more right-wing. Perhaps Scotland has grown more right-wing too, but it's still a lot more left-wing than the rest of the UK. So I think there's a perception, I mean, it's absolutely glaring when you look at the Brexit vote. That was, 65% of Scotland voted to stay, something like that. It was in the 60s
so,
and 30, maybe it was 61, 39, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it was significant. And so Scotland wants to be part of Europe, but it wants to be, again, as I said, the driver of its own destiny, not having to follow leaders that it didn't elect and policies that it doesn't agree with. So I think that resonates, that basic argument resonates with a lot of people that want Scotland to be independent.
Do you personally want Scotland to be independent?
Well, I would think that it's fairly kind of transparent that I do, yes, and some people that I've spoken to who voted no during the first independence vote would vote yes now, solely because of Brexit.
Yeah.
Because they're absolutely inflamed that happened. So it's an interesting time. We'll see what happens.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank
you
you.
bet.
Thanks.